All right, recording is started.
All right, good evening and welcome to the November 15, 2023 meeting of the Form-Based Code Area Working Group. We are holding my name is Daniel Weir. I am the working group chair. We are holding a virtual public meeting tonight and all participants with us are joining remotely. I'd like to orient everyone to the virtual environment and cover a few specifics about how tonight's meeting will run. Today's meeting is available to join from the Form-Based Code Area Working Group webpage, the county's events calendar, and at the top of tonight's agenda. Additionally, there's a dial-in phone option for those who wish to use it. If anyone loses internet connectivity during the meeting, please reconnect with us by phone. Please keep your video turned off and your microphone muted until you're called upon, and turn off sound to any other devices around you to minimize interference. These tools are located as icons on your toolbar. If you do not see the toolbar, try tapping or clicking on the center of your screen and it will pop up. When you are called upon to speak, unmute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon that is located at your command bar. The moderator does not have the ability to unmute you. If anyone is dialing in by phone, I don't believe that's the case, but if anyone is, you use *6 to unmute. And when you're finished speaking, please remute yourself to speak. Tonight's meeting is, the meeting chat is active for participants who need technical assistance only. And the meeting chat should not be used for discussion, for public comment, for questions about agenda items, or requests for more information. All public comments must be shared verbally for the record during the assigned public testimony periods. Additional notes for the members of the area working group. If you wish to be recognized to speak on an item, please turn on your video feed and leave your microphone muted. I'll use the video feeds that are on as an indicator of who would like to speak. Once you've been recognized, you may unmute, and once you have completed speaking, please turn your video feed back off. Do we have any commission members who are just with us by telephone? Going once, going twice. Additional notes for any public speakers who might be here. You'll be called upon to speak at the end of the meeting. You'll be muted when your time is concluded. And finally, tonight's meeting is a public forum. Today's meeting will be recorded and posted to the county website. All information associated with tonight's meeting, whether written or spoken, is subject to Freedom of Information Act requirements. I am going to have Ms. Sontag introduce the agenda items, and then we will go around the table, so to speak, and introduce ourselves.
All right, so the first item this evening will be the Barcroft Section 4 renovation use permit. And then as the second item this evening, we'll be covering the green building standards update to both the commercial and neighborhoods form-based codes. So as far as a round of introductions, I'm Olivia Sontag with the Arlington County Planning Division. And I'll pass it off to Matt.
Hey everybody, Matt Matusek with the Arlington County.
And we have Andrea.
Hi, it's Andrea, and I'm interning with the Planning Division. Thanks for having me here.
Welcome, Andrea. I am Linda. I'm going to call on you because you're on the top left of my participants, and then you can hand it off, or we can do popcorn.
Linda Dye, representing Douglas Park Civic Association on the advisory working group.
Amy McWilliams, representing the Columbia Pike Partnership.
Any other AWG members?
Hi, I can go next. Kathy Guernsey, representing Columbia Forest Civic Association. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Michelle Stallhead with the Penrose Civic Association.
Good evening. Thank you, Michelle.
Hi, Katya Helbing with Barcroft.
Evening, Katya. Do we have Alcova or Arlington Heights, Arlington Mill, Arlington View, Columbia Heights, Foxcroft Heights present with us? All right, well, everyone's aboard who's going aboard. Ms. Sontag, I'll give it back to you.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I will give a very brief overview of the Barcroft renovation use permit because the applicant has prepared a much more detailed presentation, so I'll yield most of my time to them. But hopefully you all can see my screen. This may look a little bit familiar because this is a phase 2 use permit. We saw the first phase of Barcroft renovations come before the AWG back in, I believe it was in June, and which was approved by the county board in July. So I'll point out where that first phase of renovations occurred, but this again is now a second phase in a different section of Barcroft. So to quickly cover some of the background to help orient us to the site and kind of the larger context that we're looking at. Jared Lynch acquired the property back in December of 2021 with assistance of a county loan as well as an Amazon Housing Equity Fund to help facilitate that purchase. As part of that purchase, affordability of the over 1,300 units is preserved with up to 60% AMI for 99 years. So with each of these use permits, we are placing a condition on the permit for that affordability term. The larger master financing and development plan was submitted in October of 2022. And staff is continuing to review and analyze that with the Jared Lynch team. So while that planning is ongoing on the Jared Lynch side, they have agreed to move forward with some initial renovation projects, which is what we're looking at today. So these renovation projects will deliver upgrades to all of these homes and improvements that the applicant will cover in just a moment. So this will allow some of these renovated units to come online in the near term as the remainder of the site is being planned for. And then it's important to note that all of these renovation use permits that we've seen and will continue to see are located within the designated neighborhoods form-based code conservation areas. So they are not envisioned for redevelopment. So the Jared Lynch team is going to be completing some on-site relocation throughout the process as required by the county. And I believe that's why we're seeing these use permits come forward in smaller chunks so that the tenants can be relocated on-site during the renovation of each of these use permit phases. So they will be able to be accommodated on the property while those renovations take place, and there will be relocation services offered by the Jared Lynch team at no cost to the tenant. So some of the communication that's occurred recently, there was a tenant town hall held on October 17th. In addition to the continuing monthly meetings that are held for residents, I believe there's another resident meeting coming up on December 4th. So information will continue to be shared with residents and give them plenty of time to prepare for the disruption of relocation, including a required 120-day notice. That's part of the conditions of approval placed on these use permits. So just a quick kind of coverage of where we are within the Columbia Pike form-based code boundaries. The yellow on the screen shows where the commercial centers are. In this case, most of the Barcroft property is contained within the neighborhoods area in blue. The specific site that we're looking at is shown in this red triangle on the screen. And then the previous use permit, I don't know if you all can see my mouse, but is up just kind of north of where this South 4 Mile Run Drive text is shown. So taking a closer look at the central subarea regulating plan, again, outlined here in red is the subject property that we're taking a look at. The previous renovation property was just, I guess, where are we looking here? Just west of South George Mason Drive in this area on the corner of South George Mason Drive and South 4 Mile Run Drive. And it is within a designated conservation area, as you can see in this lime green color throughout the property. So again, I'll just quickly highlight this because Lauren's going to go into this in more detail. But this particular use permit covers 3 separate buildings. There are 77 2-bedroom units contained within these 3 buildings. The proposal includes renovating 4 of the existing ground floor 2-bedroom units into type A 2-bedroom units. So they'll be accessible, including accessible parking spaces located just outside the entrances of those units. This request also includes a request for modifications for existing buildings to remain, which includes a modification to the parking and to the standard setback requirements. So some of the sections that we've reviewed in our review of this use permit include the conservation areas, again, those allowable modifications, the required review by the HLRB because they're within those conservation areas, and to ensure that any renovations are meeting those conservation standards via that HLRB review. So additional considerations as we review these use permits are the ongoing planning for the master financing and development plan, continued community engagement that Gyre Lynch is completing, and planned community engagement for that MFDP. And then we are including conditions about future site-wide and streetscape improvements that will occur with that larger MFDP process in the future. So a quick highlight of the schedule. The item went to the DRC back in early September. It's now been to the HLRB twice to review all of the proposed renovations. And it's scheduled to go to the Planning Commission early December, Housing Commission on December 7th, and to the County Board on December 16th or 19th. And with that, I will stop sharing and pass this off to Lauren.
Thanks, Olivia. Share my presentation. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. Good evening. I'm Lauren Riley with Walsh Colucci. We represent the applicant here, Gyre Lynch Real Estate Partners, with this second renovation project. And I'm joined tonight by Greg Ward with Gyre Lynch, and then other members of our design team are online as well after the presentation if you have any questions or comments. And so, as Olivia mentioned, we were last before you all with back in April and June of this past year with the phase 1 renovation project, and that was approved by the county board in July. And while we're waiting on that overall master financing and development plan for the Barcroft site, while that's undergoing, Gyre Lynch really wants to get started on renovating and rehabilitating some of these existing units to make the living conditions better for the existing residents, and also to fully commit these units as affordable going forward. And so these renovation projects that we've that have been approved before that are coming forward, they will include upgrades to the interiors of these units as well as to the exterior and the landscaping. And it's that exterior revision piece that requires the form-based code use permit process. And for this project, we filed our use permit back in early September. As Olivia mentioned, we anticipate going to the December Planning Commission and County Board hearings. We've also met with the Historic Affairs and Landmarks Review Board and the Design Review Committee of that board back in September and October of this year to discuss the scope of these changes and the alterations. And I'll touch on their feedback as we go through some of the proposed changes in a minute. And then I'll kind of briefly touch on this. Olivia's slide was much prettier than mine, but this just shows you where the Barcroft site is in relation to the neighborhoods and the commercial code. The Barcroft site's outlined in blue. As you can see, the majority of it is located within the neighborhoods code, and a small portion of it's located within the commercial code. And then zooming into the regulating plan map for the Barcroft site, much of it is also located within the conservation area, which is intended to preserve not only the historic nature of these buildings, but also their housing affordability as well. And then some of these other areas around the green, these are the areas that are slated for redevelopment in the future. And these renovation projects, these use permits that are coming forward will involve buildings that are located within this lime green conservation area that are not anticipated to be redeveloped in the future. And here, sorry to switch orientations on you, but now Columbia Pike, which is north, is now planned left, and we're looking at the various phases of Barcroft and where this use permit scope is located within relation to the rest of the site. As you can see on the left, this area shaded in gray, these are the 5 buildings that were included with the first renovation phase that you all reviewed this past summer. And then now we're moving on to buildings 32 through 34. This will be the scope of the second renovation phase. And you can see this site's divvied up into different phases and different sections. The first phase of the whole Barcroft Garden apartment complex was developed in the early 1940s, and it's outlined in this blue line here. And then phase 2 came along a little bit later, later 40s and early 50s is in red there. And then each of these sections is color coded according to when these buildings were constructed. As you can see, these buildings 32 to 34 are purple in section 4. And these were built in the mid 1940s. And here's an aerial image, again, showing you where this phase 2 renovation project is located in relation to the rest of the site, as well as the renovation project you all reviewed this summer. Then here's some photos of the existing buildings. This is building 32 there, which is kind of further up on South George Mason Drive. You can see the interior landscape courtyard here and some of these existing facades with the ornamentation there around the entrances. You can also see here in the bottom left photo how the grade is sloping down across the site. Here's building 33, similar ornamentation around the building entrances there. And then coming all the way down to the very tail end of Barcroft, this building 34. Again, you can see the steep topography as the grade drops off there at the end of the site. So the proposed renovations to these 3 buildings is very similar to what you all reviewed with the first phase, with the first renovation phase. So we'll be upgrading the exterior by cleaning the brick. We'll be replacing those older PTAC and boiler systems within the building, and upgrading with more modern heating and air equipment. And so that'll require, taking out some penetrations in the front elevations and infilling those with brick to match. It'll also involve new penetrations in the rear of the buildings to accommodate for venting. We'll be repairing and replacing exterior fixtures. We'll be replacing these asphalt roofs with new roofs to match. And then we'll also be replacing some of those basement metal windows with vinyl windows to match the existing building. And then in terms of alterations, we'll also be taking 4 units there that are on the back of building 33. here, and I have a more detailed site plan to show you in a moment. But we're taking 4 units on the back there and making them type A accessible units. And in order to make those units accessible, that necessitates some other changes to the parking lot location, the parking lot layout there, as well as adding in some new pathways and ramps to get people up, to get those folks up to those ADA units. Here's an illustrative site plan of the proposed changes, focusing on, building 33 and those changes we're making around those ADA units. You can see the location of those 4 entrances here. We've put in some new pathways so that folks can enter those units easily from the parking lot. Up here, there'll be some new ADA ramps to bring people up to grade so that they can enter these units at the finished floor elevation. We'll also be adding a new proposed amenity area similar to what we were doing with the first renovation project. We'll add some outdoor gathering space that'll be accessible to these residents in these 3 buildings, and in particular, those residents of the new ADA units. And then lastly, we'll also be providing, we'll be moving the trash over here and providing a new enclosure for it within that parking lot. Then here's some elevations of those new ADA entrances on the back of building 33. So currently there are windows right here where these doors are located. And what we'll be doing is we'll be taking those windows down, further down, to create a doorway entry for those residents. And we've created these ramps to get them up to grade. And we met with the HLRB and the DRC on these items in September and October. We focused primarily on the treatment of these entrances, the canopies on the building, and the railings. And our original submission actually included some railings and guardrails here, but we were able to work with the grade to actually eliminate the need for those. So because we've made those ramps, we've lessened the slope of those ramps, so it's easier for folks to get up to those units. And then we also discussed the rear canopies here at these back entrances. And typically, Virginia Housing requires canopies at all residential entrances. And with phase 1, with the first renovation phase, we've included those canopies, but said we would request a waiver from Virginia Housing. We heard back from the DRC and the HLRB that they would prefer to keep the canopies on these new ADA units at the rear, which is appropriate, and we agree. We propose to keep these here and not request that waiver. And here's another image, so you can kind of see in 3D how these new ADA entrances will be treated. And then, like I said, with the new doors for those entrances, we'll be taking those windows and bringing them down. And we're looking, in terms of design, we're looking to what's next to us, what rear entrance doors look like in the buildings neighboring us. So here is an image of a rear entrance on building 30, and then one that's on 32. You can kind of ignore these side windows because we will not have that condition on the back of building 33, but we are going to implement the arched entrance as well as the style of this door. We will be requesting a modification of the conservation area standards for this door material because Virginia Housing requires these doors to be fiberglass, and that's appropriate, especially on the rear elevation of these buildings. And then, as I mentioned, like last time, as required by Virginia Housing, in order to obtain tax credit financing, we're showing the canopies on all residential entrances to these buildings, but we will be requesting a waiver from Virginia Housing. And likewise, same thing with the vinyl or aluminum cladding of wood trim. It's required, unfortunately, by Virginia Housing, so we're proposing it in this application, but we will eliminate it if our waiver is granted. Then here's just a summary overview of our application. As I mentioned, we filed that use permit in early September and anticipate going to the board this December. With that use permit, we're proposing those exterior renovations to the building, which include the new ADA unit entrances and those landscape changes to the parking area. We'll be requesting modifications of the form-based code to allow those modifications of the required setbacks in the parking to allow those existing conditions to remain. And then we are requesting modifications of the conservation area standards to allow those basement windows to be vinyl to match the existing building, to allow those new wall penetrations on the rear elevations for those heating and air equipment, as well as the ADA unit entrances, as well as a modification, the conservation area for the fiberglass door. And then those other set of conservation area modifications for the wood trim and for the canopies, we are requesting those, but again, we'll ask for a waiver from Virginia Housing, so we might not have to implement them. And that brings us to the end of my presentation. That's all we've got. Our team is open for questions.
All right, thank you for that excellent presentation. I think that we are going to, barring any suggestions to the contrary from Ms. Sontag, just go straight to questions and open discussion. Ms. Sontag, we are advertised until 8:30. Is that correct?
9 o'clock typically.
Until 9 o'clock. Okay. And so I am going to I'm going to take this pretty free form until about 8:15. At that point, I'm going to say we need to move on to the next topic, and then I think that 30 minutes is going to be sufficient for the next topic, and then we'll have some time for any public comment for both items together at the end. So that all being said, I'm just going to go through. I don't see. One more time, I don't see Mark, Noreen, Ed, or James. If you're here under a different name, please let me know. And Betty, I don't recall whether or not you spoke up at the beginning, but I see you here, so I've got you on the roster as present. So I'm talking until I see someone's camera light up. As a reminder, if you have a question, there we go, Ms. Siegel. And then I see Linda Dye, so it's going to be Betty, and then Linda, and then Catherine. But the rule is that I ask you to light your camera up, but I actually do. I appreciate the team's raise hand tool as well, insofar as it gives me a list, and I'm gonna ask us to use both the raise hand and the turning on your camera, just so that way I have that information. But Linda, I'm still going to go to you before Catherine, and then Michelle. Back to you, Betty. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Of course, I'm always excited when I see accessibility mentioned. I do like calling things properly, and so these are accessible entrances. They're not ADA entrances. They may be required by the ADA, but that's probably not the way to label things. I'm curious about a couple of things given the age of the buildings. One, will the doors be made to be 32 or 36 inches wide? And will the doorknobs also be adjusted so that they're not round handles, but levered? And I think the canopies are essential because people fumble with their keys at their doors, and somebody who has manual dexterity issues, whether you're due to aging or arthritis or anything else like that, should have some cover from the weather while they're maneuvering to get into their front door. I think you have the opportunity to make this into a real model of what a renovation of this kind can be by paying attention to a lot of the little details. And I'd really love to see those reflected in the drawings, not just presumed or, we'll get to that later. And I will turn it over to the next person.
Thanks. Before Linda, I go to you, Lauren or Olivia, if you have anything that you just like 1 or 2 sentences, and then we can keep things moving. But if there's something critical, I wanted to give you the opportunity.
Sure. I think there was a specific question on the width of the doors, and I'll recognize
Perfect,
Merdad
thank you.
Fruzan or Antoine Ledron with Blanchard Hairsign Architecture to see if they've got that information on hand. If not, we can take a look at that and get back to you on what's proposed.
Yes, the doors are code compliant, and based on the codes, they have the correct width, which is 36 inches.
And Merdad, what about the door knobs? I assume they'll be levered, right?
Yeah, everything is code compliant.
Yeah, that's all I had. Thanks.
All right, thank you. I think that I said that I was going to go to Linda next, and so as long as that's what I said, Linda, I'm going to go to you next.
Okay, thank you. It's great to hear that there are going to be ADA units. Just one point, when I was going through the materials in the applicant presentation on number 9, in the text it says that you're converting 2 units in the rear of 33. It's very clear you're doing 4 because it says 4 on slide 10. But for some reason in the narrative on slide 9, it says you're only converting 2 units. So FYI. In the applicant materials, page 8, sheet C07, concerning the service drive, in particular, the section AA view. That was a very interesting thing to check out because it shows that the existing parking lane is only 6 feet and the existing travel lane is only 7 feet. And the note on this item states that no improvements are proposed. So I'm wondering, physically, how do the vehicles maneuver long-term through this area? Whether it's, can you restripe, or is it unfortunately a situation where you'd have to actually do some construction and you wouldn't be able to just restripe to enhance this? But a parking lane of 6 feet and a travel lane of 7 feet, I don't know how they deal with it today. So I'm just wondering if that can't be rectified, especially since we're talking long-term improvements for the whole complex. Page 12, sheet C10, the RPA and floodplain. I'm curious if the project overall, are you all facing any particular challenges with regard to the RPA and the floodplain, since it's quite extensively delineated on page 12, sheet C10. Are there any particular challenges?
Linda, would you like us
I'll
to
let you get started with all
John.
those and then.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I would like to think we have Jeff Krups with VICA. If Jeff, you could jump on and speak to the widths of that parking lane and travel lane and that's interior to this site. I think we're limited with the current width of that street right now, what we can do with it. But Jeff, do you want to talk about how cars maneuver through there today?
Yeah, good evening. Yeah, this is Jeff Krebs. I'm a landscape architect with VICA. I was having difficulty following exactly where you were referring to, but the long and short of it is as Lauren described. All of these existing travelways are existing, and there is really no horizontal room to expand them. So the fire marshal presumably can do what he needs to do in the space that he has allotted, and there are no. I think the note about street sections really refers to perimeter streets, public street sections, where we're saying we are not making any improvements to the public streets surrounding us. And in this case, the only alterations we're making are to the parking lot in the back to accommodate the accessible parking spaces. So I hope that answers your question.
Right, and I think on one side of the drive, we have the existing building, so I don't think we can expand that further that way. And then on the other side of the drive is Doctor's Run. So I think you run into issues trying to expand that existing service drive. And currently, as Jeff said, the fire marshal can access that area for emergency purposes as it is today. And then on the floodplain, the RPA area, our team has looked at that. County staff and DES have looked at that as well. We don't have any issues with our proposed improvements within that area. They are all compliant with the floodplain ordinance and the RPA standards.
Correct.
And
Okay,
Linda, did you
great.
want to touch on anything else?
Yes, page 29, sheet L01, the tree inventory plan. Basically, is your overall policy for the entire project over the coming years to plant new trees for all trees removed, whether they're dead or they're in the way, in terms of needing to make some modifications? So are you basically replacing every single tree that has to be removed for one reason or another in general for the entire project?
That is the general strategy. So everything that comes out that has to be removed that's live would follow the county's replacement requirement calculation at a minimum. And then the owner's goal overall is to anything that's dying or dead, right, would be removed and replaced as well. And that would be factored into our calculations as each phase comes through.
Okay, sounds good. Building on that, page 32, sheet L04, the tree replacement tabulation. Can you please explain the formulas that are shown? Because I was trying to figure out, I don't know that I've ever seen these formulas before. I guess we just never have been presented with them on any of the projects we've looked at. So can you just explain what these formulas are in terms of coming up with the total number of trees that you're going to replace and what the new numbers are?
So you're looking at sheet L04, is that correct?
L04, yes.
Okay, yes. So there are a couple different calculations for trees that are to be removed. Earlier in a couple sheets back in the set, there is a tree inventory done. And so sheet L02, if you look in there, on the second big column over, there are two trees right in the middle, 3654 and 3655. Those are the two trees that have to come out with this particular proposal. There is a formula that those numbers in those columns basically are multiplied together, which gives us a value and determines the number of replacement trees we owe the county based on that score. So a nice tree with a big healthy tree that we have to take down is very likely going to require more than one replacement, as is the case for both of these. There's a white oak that requires 3 trees to be replaced to meet that requirement. So that's the starting point. We go through, identify every tree on site 3 inches or greater and over, and then we run through this calculation for each one based on the limit of disturbance and the proposed work. That tells us which trees are going to have to come out. In this case, this is the big oak we were talking about, and the hemlock sits right here, both of which are impacted by the accessibility improvements we're making there. So that gives us the number. We say, okay, we now, total trees to be removed. We're actually taking out 2 trees, right? So the 2 trees required a total replacement of 5. We're actually planting a lot more than that. So we're planting, the number of canopy trees, I believe, is 21. Actually, it's, let's see. Sorry, I have a different plan in front of me. I think we're 14 canopy trees, and then the understory trees, which are the smaller trees, which are equally important to sort of overall forest health. Those are calculated at 3 to 1. In other words, 1 removed canopy tree I would need to replace with 3 understory trees. So that's what that second part of that calculation is. We're proposing 21 understory trees, but we only get credit for 7 of them based on the county's standard formula. So that's how we get to the total of 21. So it's a little bit awkward, but that's how it works out. So we're planting well in excess of what we're required to plant, and that will probably be true as we go forward with each phase.
Okay. All right. Last 2 things, general questions. Doctor's Run. Do you all need to do any repairs or stabilization?
We have not, as part of this particular application, studied Doctor's Run specifically at all, so I can't speak to that at this point.
Okay.
And that is, I think, basically it's a county facility, if you will. But I'm sure it will come up as we move forward through other areas within the project as well.
Okay, so you haven't discovered anything of, we've got erosion, or something's about to collapse. You haven't
We
seen
have
anything like that.
We haven't even looked at it, right? It's outside the scope of what we're doing so far.
Okay. Final question. What kind of electric vehicle charging infrastructure do you have any plans to include anywhere throughout the property?
So currently, we aren't proposing to put in new EV infrastructure in these existing buildings. I think that's something that we'll look at as part of the overall master finance and development plan, or with future projects, especially new construction. I think with these buildings are currently oriented, it might be difficult to run conduit out to those parking garage areas and provide electricity there. But we haven't studied that yet. I think that's something that'll come with the overall master plan. Okay, that's all I've got. Thank you.
I have a follow-up question on the lane width issue. Am I right? Jeff, this might be for you, but Olivia, might be for you too. The 6-foot parking width does not include the width of the gutter. Is that correct?
I was actually trying to find that plan so I could give you an accurate answer, but typically the travel lane is exclusive of the gutter pan. That is typical. Occasionally we'll give a pavement width curb to curb if there isn't a gutter pan in place, but typically you are correct. In this case, it looks like, the 16 feet I'm looking at, looks like it actually is curb to curb. It's dimensioned as curb to curb, which is in the back of that building. And it does show that there is gutter on both sides, but so the travel way is a little bit narrower. So we're looking at section
AA, the service drive.
Yeah.
I would really love to see that confirmed at some point, whether that's what is 22 feet curb to curb, or if that's actually 25 feet curb to curb, because that's going to make a big difference in the concerns, in the practical concerns, right? About vehicles negotiating it. It's one thing for the fire marshal to have said we're fine with this. It's another thing to ask the residents to be negotiating it day in and day out, especially when there are going to be vehicles that are going to be the kinds of vehicles that people with limited mobility often have to drive. Obviously, we don't need to track down the answer tonight, but I would ask that you put a pin in that one and we get it straightened out.
Absolutely, yeah. When I look at the plan that I'm looking at, the service drive, it's actually it's dimensioned as 28 feet from curb to curb, which includes gutter pan on one side of the street. So 26.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, 26 traversable. So we will definitely put a pin in that and just make sure that is all sort of in sync.
Great, thank you. Catherine, to you, and thank you, Linda, for the comprehensive questions.
Hi, everyone. So I too am excited about ADA accessible units. Betty had already addressed the questions that I had around door widths and the levered handles versus the sort of round ones that were in the illustrative photographs. I'm going to assume that those illustrative photographs which had steps will not be part of the picture, that there will be true controlled-free access.
Yes.
I have two questions. One relates to the interior, and I recognize this presentation is very much focused on exterior. But in order for those units, which presumably haven't had accessible entrances to date, for them to be truly accessible, what are you doing on the interior, either in terms of widening doors or providing better navigation space for bathrooms or ADA accessible, height of toilets and things like that. So I'm curious what changes might we be making on the interior of those units to render them more accessible? That's my first question.
Right. Well, we probably don't have the full layouts ready at this point because the interiors aren't within the scope of the form-based code use permit piece of it. But we have determined, how will this function, taking these, what are now windows, which I think are into the living area, the bathrooms of these units, and then kind of converting these units so that they are accessible and they do meet the code standards. And I can recognize Merdad or Antoine if you want to, if you have any information on the interior layout, how that will change to accommodate accessibility, or Greg, if you have any information.
Yes, actually the layout is, we've already worked on the layout, and everything, as you mentioned, is accommodated for the ADA unit. This is what we do very well. We know how to do it, and there's no worry about it. All the bathrooms, kitchen cabinets, all the turns, everything is accommodated for a handicapped person based on the codes and regulations.
Very good. They've already done it for us.
Thank you. My second question relates to parking associated with those units. And I'm going to turn to, I think, page 19 of the applicant materials, which should be sheet A7, I believe. I hope I'm looking at the most appropriate diagram.
Yeah, 19 is sheet A8. I think A7 is the 18. I'll share my screen just to make sure. Is this one?
Yeah, that's the one. So I see what look like the four units towards the top there. Yep. And to the top left, it looks like there are two accessible parking spaces, which for those two units on the top left, I guess, those two units on the top left, we'll call it, those would be relatively proximate to those units. I'm curious about parking options for the other two accessible units, and apologies if you've covered this somewhere else, but I was just wondering, do only two of the units effectively have accessible parking? Is that accurate?
Yeah,
or is
I think it was hard to see in that architectural plan sheet. I've reshared the screen with our illustrative plan, so you can see, as you mentioned, there's those two there in the corner, and then there's another two right here, presumably for those folks who are accessing these units on the further end of building 33. So they'll be able, so there'll be 4 new handicap spaces in the parking lot. We've kind of restriped that lot to accommodate for those spaces.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, I was just not seeing those top two in the middle, and it looks as though there are only 2 spaces for 2 of the units. So thanks for addressing that. I appreciate it.
Of course.
Back to the next org member.
I guess that would be you, Michelle. Thank you.
Hi, I actually think my questions might have been answered. I was going to ask about whether the doors were like push button doors, but I see that it's like each individual door for each individual unit where that probably wouldn't happen. And so I didn't realize that at first. I just had a question. I think maybe for Olivia, I'm not sure about the relocation plan as part of this overall project. Was that just part of this negotiation, or was that like is there a county policy that kind of details like the relocation guidelines, I guess, for what they have to do? And is that like the cost of relocation is all paid for by Jerry Lynch, or I just wasn't quite clear on that. I know it's kind of a large, not just this project, but a larger question.
Yeah, I can let Lauren address the cost piece of it, but on the county side, as part of these development projects, we do require tenant relocation plans, which we include as conditions of approval of these projects.
Right. Yeah, that's right. And we've had with our last use permit with the phase 1, there's a set of conditions in there that require us to comply with the not only with the county's policy, but to go above and beyond that and actually provide financial assistance for those residents, as well as to relocate them on site. So normally the county policy does not require you to relocate folks on site if you do need to. However, here we've recognized the importance of the folks in Barcroft to remain within this community. And so Gyre Lynch has phased these renovation projects accordingly. So we're able to move residents out of these existing buildings into another unit in Barcroft. And Greg, please chime in if I'm wrong, but Gyre Lynch will be providing financial assistance for all residents who are relocated.
Yes, that's correct. You said it well. Thank you.
I think I'm going to say that I think that that's nearly everyone. Just to confirm that this is another situation like the last one where we're in the by right, so to speak, form-based code process, correct? This is not okay. You're shaking your head. I'm glad that I asked because that means I'm not. That means that I haven't internalized that part. So you were talking then about the going to the planning commission in December, but maybe you can just bring up that process slide one more time.
Sure, I can share that again. And the reason that this one, even though these changes are, seem on their face very minor, is that it's located within the conservation areas, and that there are also those modifications being requested for those existing buildings to remain. But I'll pull up that process slide one more time if that's helpful.
And with the last project, Commissioner Weir, that you heard in October, that one wasn't in the neighborhoods code, but was not in the conservation area. And all of those proposed improvements complied with the form-based code regulation. So it was able to be approved administratively, though the FBC requires that we always go to the AWG for each project, including ones that are administrative.
Okay. And have you gotten feedback from the from HALB and the design review committee specifically about the plans to remove the about the intent or the aspiration to remove the trim on the entrances?
Yes, and that was a big part of our phase 1 renovation meetings with the HLRB and DRC, and we've continued to discuss that throughout, that the proposed canopies on the front elevations and on entrances that are not accessible, we have to show those on the plans, and they have to get approved for tax credit financing purposes, but we will be, and we have requested a waiver from Virginia Housing on those. And so the HALRB and the DRC, do not recommend those improvements, the trim or the canopies, though they understand they're necessary for financing. However, we're optimistic that we won't have to make those alterations.
Okay, and so will we know more about whether the alterations need to be made by the time this comes to planning commission?
I don't think we'll know by the time this project gets to the December planning commission, because we weren't able to get that application we weren't able to get that financing application and the waiver request in the door until October. And so Virginia Housing is still in the process of reviewing those applications. I think, Greg, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're not anticipating to hear back on the waiver requests until mid to late December after the new year.
Okay.
That's right. We actually have a site visit with Virginia Housing the week after Thanksgiving to go over all of our Virginia Housing waivers. So that will really start that process, but I don't think that we'll know the answer, like Lauren said, until mid-December.
So what we did on the last use permit is we brought both options before the board. We included them as attachments. So both are approved, and then we'll just wait to hear back on the waiver.
Okay. All right. Great. That's a good way of doing it. It seems. I don't have any other questions on this point, unless there are any questions from anyone else on the AWG or any other items that that staff or the applicant want to bring up. We might be able to move on to our second item tonight? I'm not seeing any hands or cameras. That's great. Ms. Riley and colleagues,
All
thank
right.
you for the presentation and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, everybody. We appreciate your time. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Great.
Good night. Thank you.
All right, I will share my screen with the next item. All right, so these are some proposed zoning ordinance amendments to update the green building standards in both the commercial and the neighborhoods form-based code. So when the commercial code was adopted in 2003, there were no green building requirements included, although we do require applicants to submit a certification scorecard as part of the submission materials. And we definitely encourage voluntary compliance with those certification requirements. Then in 2013, when the Neighborhoods Form-Based Code was adopted, it did include green building standards, which at its highest is LEED Silver, and then depending on the building envelope standard, decreases from there. So just quickly, kind of the aspirational timeline that we have for this item is a request to advertise going to the county board this December, and then the final consideration of those amendments going to the board in the Planning Commission in February of 2024. So we began this process back in March of this year, and began by just taking a look at the existing requirements of the neighborhoods code, and then reaching out to different county departments to understand their work with current green building standards, both in and outside of the neighborhood, both of the form-based codes. So we've talked with current planning staff on the site plan review team just to understand their work with the green building incentive policy and some of the certification types and levels that they see achieved on some of those site plan projects. We also talked with our inspection services division to understand how the building code intersects with some of these green building standards. We met with housing staff in CPHD to learn a little bit more about what is required in order to earn tax credits for affordable housing projects. And then we worked throughout this process with our colleagues in the Department of Environmental Services Green Building Program. So outside of that, we met with planners at Fairfax County and the city of Alexandria to hear a little bit about some of their kind of concurrent updates to green building standards, and then 2 different architecture firms that we've worked with a handful of times on form-based code projects. So again, we're revisiting the form-based code boundaries here. Commercial codes in orange and the neighborhoods areas in blue. So before we jump into some of the findings from the conversations with other county departments and external stakeholders, I just wanted to provide a snapshot of some of the certifications that we've seen to date since the original adoption of the commercial code 20 years ago and the neighborhoods code 10 years ago. So under the commercial code, we've seen a total of 17 development proposals come through and have been approved by the county board. And only 4 of those have delivered commitments to sustainability by voluntarily agreeing to achieve a certification pathway. one of which was an affordable housing project. That's where we see this Earthcraft Platinum. And then two recent projects who we alerted that these changes were these green building standards updates were forthcoming. So they also targeted certification levels, although these were just approved in 2022 and 2023, so they're not yet built. So on to our 6 neighborhoods form-based code projects that have been approved. These all were required to provide a certain level of green building standard certification depending on their building envelope standards. So we've had a handful meeting that LEED Silver standard. And then one of our most recent projects that opened, Arlington View Terrace East, did achieve Earthcraft Gold. That was an AHC project, and they were required to meet that level of certification in order to earn those credits. And then the first Barcroft renovation project did target the National Green Building Standard silver level. We also at last month's meeting reviewed Arlington View Terrace West, and that project was also targeting Earthcraft Gold certification. So some of our general findings in speaking with other county departments and external stakeholders were that a variety of certification options are preferred to just accommodate some of the different needs of these development projects, development typologies, and some of the difficulties with the process of each certification option. There's a general emphasis on moving towards more performance and outcome-based certification methods. And then another emphasis on wanting Energy Star certification for these projects, in addition to the kind of overarching certification requirements. Specific to Columbia Pike, we learned that projects on the Pike do score high in points for transportation and location in particular. Even though they're not on a metro corridor, the access to transit does allow them to score fairly high in those areas. They also score fairly high in the development footprint sections, open space sections, which under the form-based code, it does require anywhere from 15 to 25% of the buildable area as for open space, and then also higher points on in the rainwater management category. For affordable housing projects, again, if affordable housing projects choose to earn their points by meeting sustainability standards, they must meet either LEED Gold or Earthcraft Gold as a minimum standard. So that's why we're seeing some of those projects achieve such higher levels of sustainability. We've heard from several members of housing staff and other developers that Earthcraft is often the preferred option for these affordable housing projects, just given the process. So again, an example of that is Arlington View Terrace East and West, which both pursued Earthcraft Gold. In terms of LEED Silver, we're often seeing, as we saw in a couple examples of the commercial form-based code projects, that LEED Silver is proposed even without incentives. We do know that LEED version 5 is currently under review. We're still uncertain of that release date. I think recent feedback from DES is that they were looking for the release in Q4 of 2024. So still some time. So all of the references that you'll see proposed here and in any updated condition language will continue to reference LEED version 4. There is a 10-point gap between LEED Silver and Gold, although many of the scorecards that we receive for these projects do almost reach that LEED Gold certification level. So we do feel that by targeting gold earlier in the process, that level is attainable. We've also heard feedback that the certification process can be very lengthy and expensive, so another reason to offer a variety of certification options. And then in regards to Earthcraft, this option is currently offered in the GBIP, and Earthcraft Gold is equated to LEED Gold in the GBIP. One of the positives of this certification process that we heard was that they do provide a technical advisor, which really assists with this process. It also has a heavier emphasis on performance than LEED does, and the overhead cost is generally lower. So on to the main event. These are the proposed updates that staff has landed on through all of this analysis. So in this table, we've broken up our building envelope standards into the kind of multifamily and mixed use categories for the neighborhoods and commercial form-based codes, and then the townhouse, duplex, detached, kind of lower density building envelope standards in the neighborhoods and commercial form-based codes. So you'll see in the second column here, the existing minimum standards, again, non-existing for those two, the commercial form-based codes, but for the multifamily mixed-use building envelope standards, currently we require LEED Silver certification, or for Virginia Housing Development Authority projects, LEED or Earthcraft certification as an option. What we're proposing is, for minimum standards, is LEED Gold, Earthcraft Gold, or an equivalent certification as determined by our Department of Environmental Services green building staff. So we have a number of different certification options that could be equivalent, but again, it would be on a case-by-case basis. We'd also be looking for them to achieve Energy Star certification, some additional energy optimization metrics, which we'll cover on the next slide, and some additional prerequisites, which again, I'll talk a little bit more on the next slide. So under our lower density building envelope standards, we currently require LEED or LEED Earthcraft certification or an equivalent certification. We also currently list Green Home Choice as an option. However, that program has been placed on hold, and we're unsure when it may come back online. As part of our proposed minimum standards, we're not including Green Home Choice at this time, but we are proposing LEED, Earthcraft, or an equivalent certification for these lower density building envelope standards. In addition to that, we are still proposing that they meet Energy Star certification, but we're not tacking on those energy optimization and additional prerequisites for these building envelope standards. So to take a closer look at the energy optimization requirements that we're considering, these are pulled from the current green building incentive policy that applies to sites elsewhere in the county looking for to earn additional density. These standards were automatically updated this June. So all of these energy optimization standards reflect that automatic update that occurred in June. So one of these optimization options would have to be met, and they're designed to accommodate different certification pathways that are selected. And then some of the additional prerequisites that we're looking at, again, have already been reviewed and vetted through the Green Building Incentive Policy, which was adopted back in 2019. So some of these prerequisites include Energy Star appliances and fixtures, those WaterSense plumbing fixtures, refrigerant leakage, equity, diversity, and inclusion program requirements for contractors. Energy benchmarking, air sealing of ventilation supply and exhaust, EV charging infrastructure, biophilia, bird-friendly materials, renewable energy, and light pollution reduction. We did provide a memo that was distributed to the zoning committee a couple weeks ago. So all of these additional prerequisites are further explained in that document, and we're happy to answer questions about that as well. So as far as the schedule, back in October, we met with NAOP. Really did not receive any questions on the proposal, but maybe everyone's just was not ready to ask questions at that time. We did meet with the zoning committee last week. We plan to meet with the Climate Change, Energy, and Environment Commission in December. This item will go to the county board for request to advertise in December. And again, we're targeting a planning commission and county board hearing for the amendment in February. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen, turn it back over to Commissioner Weir, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Olivia. And same format. Just raise your hand, turn your camera on, and we'll just have a discussion. Perhaps it will be a brief one. Michelle, thank you.
I'll always chime in if we have to. I was just, I guess one thing, what did ZOCO have to say? I see the meeting summary and things aren't up from the ZOCO meeting. Did they have any, I'm just curious about that.
They also had very, very few questions about this. I think the one item that the chair raised was just that there will likely be to anticipate questions about building electrification. We know that that's a topic that's come up quite a bit. But again, very brief discussion on this item there.
I'll keep going. I just have a question. This is kind of a bigger question because I honestly just don't remember, which is with the certification process, like and you probably said it, but I missed it. Like, do they actually get certified? I know LEED is expensive and yada yada. And then how do we make sure that they get certified? Like, I know I just don't remember how it works, honestly.
No, that's a great question. So as part of this update, if the board were to approve updates to these green building standards, we would also be updating the standard condition language that would be attached to any use permit that went through this process. So as part of those conditions, it does require certain kind of checkpoints with different departments within the county. And we have our green building program staff that will work directly with them throughout that certification process. So it does give them a time frame in which to achieve that certification. For things like energy optimization, there's utility data that they have to provide, and again, they have a timeline in which to demonstrate that they're meeting those kind of energy benchmarks throughout the process. So it is a long one, and it does require quite a bit of monitoring, and that's part of the challenge of these, requiring this level of sustainability. But we do have kind of the staff and the conditions and the program set up to do that monitoring.
But at the end, it's not like we hold up their CO or something. Is it just like what if they don't make it or decide halfway through they've changed their minds or something?
So it is tied to certain certificates of occupancy at certain checkpoints. But we currently have in our condition language a bond requirement. So that if they do fall short of the certification points that they're required, they would be required to pay the difference. But I don't know that, I can't think of any projects where that's happened. .
Michelle, if you're good, I'm going to go to Amy, but your camera is back on, so I
Sorry,
want to jump in.
one last, just on that
Of course,
line of
please.
thinking, the bond require, so no one's ever just left the money there. And I only ask because I'm very familiar with another green building program where I don't know where that they did the same thing, but then wasn't sure where the money went. Like people didn't come back to get their money for the bond requirement, and then do you know where the money goes for the bond
Oh, that's
requirement
interesting.
if they don't come back and get it?
I'm not sure how that process works or where those funds are held. I think we typically have, people are typically eager to get their bond money back once they've met these requirements. I think the challenging part with this is in some cases, such as I believe the Energy Star certification, we can allow up to 48 months depending on what we're asking them to demonstrate. So it is a long process and can be a long time for those bonds to be held. Which again, just it's a challenge that is not unique to Arlington County. Other counties are struggling with the monitoring piece of this.
Thank you, Amy. Do you?
Yeah, I'm just curious how this process affects stuff that's already in the pipeline. Like, do they have to go back and try to figure that out if they want to get those benefits?
I'm going to see if Matt can jump in on this one briefly. We are continuing to discuss, when those projects would vest, but typically it's once the final filing has occurred, that's when a form-based code project vests. And that's typically around the time that the AWG is reviewing that final filing. But Matt, any other detail on that?
Yeah, and that's an important distinction from the site plan review process, where the term they use to begin their process is final. So for us, it's a much later stage since much of the review is preliminary, done by staff. Again, I think what we try to do is be very transparent and alert even folks that are just coming in to initially have a conversation about whether or not they would even want to file the preliminary application, and let them know that this work is going on and we have a projected timeline that I think we're trying to achieve, and continue to work with those folks. But I think ultimately, as we go through the Planning Commission and County Board, we anticipate that those discussions might clarify this further in terms of the specific date at which this will go into effect. And in fact, by that point, if we still have some active projects, are they going to be meeting the same level of requirements?
Okay. So somebody who's like halfway through the process, like, and this becomes part of their new requirements, like what does that look like for them? Or I guess my question is, more importantly, like is there a heads up of like, hey, 3400, we're looking at some standards that your initial plan hasn't met. Is there a process to give them the opportunity to meet those standards that might not actually be in place yet, but potentially will be?
I think the two that are active currently, and as best as we can tell, are months away from really reaching the advisory working group level of discussion. I think they've been alerted to our framework and initial recommendations back in September, maybe, or August. So I think they've had some time in what we consider still early in their design stage to figure out what they were anticipating before and what they may need to consider moving forward. So that's something that we're going to keep working with them on.
Okay. So my next question would be around like the Fillmore Shopping Center, which has had a plan that's like good to go, and they've gotten tied up in money and whatnot. If their original plan was approved, but they've been delayed because of market concerns, where does that put them in terms of this? Like, are they grandfathered or? Yeah.
So for that specific project, that's another example where I guess Matt was the one who worked on that one, but talked to them early in the process. We already had this item on the work plan, and they did agree to achieve LEED Silver as part of that, even though there were no green building standards under the commercial code at that time. So that has been that was included as a condition of approval for that specific project. I guess what we don't know is when, if use permits have to be renewed or if they expire. I'm not sure how this would apply, but
Yeah, no, thanks. We're trying to get tenants in there. We're trying to get the building uncondemned. Fingers crossed, y'all. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Anyone else on this? Michelle, yeah, I was going to call on you because I saw that you had lit up a moment ago. Thank you.
Sorry, I was making dinner at the same time as I was listening, but the prerequisites again, when it says on your memo, the additional prerequisites under consideration include yada yada yada. Are those Arlington County prerequisites? They're not that, because I know the green building pros have like a baseline of prerequisites. Are these the Arlington County prerequisites? And then I have a question.
yes, so these are prerequisites that were already kind of studied and identified with the green building incentive policy. So, and a lot of these things are automatically done in projects, but it's more to memorialize, making sure there are, refrigerant leakage requirements involved, and but also just to add a couple other priorities that assist in meeting the county's climate and energy plan.
Sorry, and then they get a pick from these, or like
No, these would
they're
all
all
be
of them required
as
part of
currently
the-
proposed. They would
I
all be
see.
required.
Yeah. So I have a question specifically about the equity one. Like, were there other equity prereqs considered, and then like this one was chosen, or was like this kind of the only thing because some other departments have done it previously?
So given the kind of limited scope that we had for this project, we did lean on all of the previous study that was done under the Green Building Incentive Program review, which was much more robust. So that's how they arrived at some of these additional prerequisites. So one of those that emerged was the diversity, equity, and inclusion program. And again, those the details of that I think are laid out a little bit more in that memo, which includes an attachment that details some of those requirements, but generally includes a staff training plan that reflects the firm's understanding of structural racism and its intersection with the building industry, professional development opportunities, and then strategies in place to ensure inclusion. So
Yeah, I read it. I was just wondering that in kind of the larger look, was that the only like sort of equity prerequisite that was considered, or were there other ones? And then staff was like, oh, this is the one that makes most sense. A yes or no is fine. You don't have to like explain more than that. I'm just genuinely curious about that.
I will say, yes, that was what was studied at the time of the Green Building Incentive Program policy adoption. However, there has been further ongoing study since then that we may be able to kind of round this out and provide even a more robust program as this moves from the request to advertise to the final proposal for the board in February.
And it doesn't come back to us, right? Like this is it. It goes to RTA and then it goes to the board. It doesn't come back to our group, right?
Correct. It's not scheduled to come back.
Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for comments and questions and discussion. Unless there is anything else, Olivia, can you remind us when the next meeting is scheduled for?
The next meeting is scheduled for December 13th. Let me double check. Yes, December 13th.
All right. And unless there is anything important that I'm forgetting,
Public
yeah,
comment?
public. Oh, yes. Thank you. That's very important. Do we have anyone on the line who would like to give public comment? I am not seeing anyone. Going once, going twice. All right. Thank you for reminding me to hold that open. So now, if there's anything else that I am forgetting, we will be adjourned. And good night, everyone. And we will talk on the in December.
Thanks all.
Have a
Thank
good night,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.